I can see a lot of people are joining us now. I'm giving a few more minutes to kickstart. Perhaps I could actually start now while waiting for the rest by introducing the speakers today. We're very, very lucky today because we have three fantastic speakers that can actually share with us about planning for research impact. Why I say it's fantastic because they themselves have done it. You know, some of them have manage and support researchers to coordinate and do research impact. So if you have any questions in your mind, feel free to put it in the chat. But it is something that we are looking forward for today's session. Now, without delaying it any further, right? We are pressed of time here. I would rather to hear more from our speakers. So we know that today we are looking into about planning for research impact. We have, for the first one is Professor Abdul Hasib, the Dean of Innovative Industry and Sustainability Science Research Cluster, Institute of Research Management and Monitoring, University Malaya, Malaysia. We also have Dr. Adriana Dranshiva. She is a lecturer in entrepreneurship from University of Sheffield, United Kingdom. Thank you, Adriana, for being here at 7 o'clock in the morning from the UK. Fantastic to have you on board. And the third speaker, we have Dr. Wan Wardatul Amani, Deputy Director, Innovation and Commercialization Unit, Research Management Center, International Islamic University, Malaysia. So we are lucky to have her. One thing because she herself involved in the development of the COVID kit. So definitely there's a lot of conversation about impact there, and I know for a fact as well. Professor Abdul Hasib is currently implementing and supporting research impact across university in Malaysia. And I also aware that Adriana is, receive a lot of fundings and currently am going through a lot of impact engagement and planning for her research work. So I'm not going to take any time further. I think you are better to listen to our speakers. And perhaps I'm actually passing the baton to Professor Abdul Hasib to introduce himself first, and at least to share about what currently he's doing, so that everybody will have some awareness in terms of his area of work. Professor, you want to share your screen? So just a little bit of planning here. So he will share his screen and to describe a little bit about what he do for 5 minutes. And then we move on to each of the speakers to explain their role. And then we will move on to a more conversational and panelist way of discussion. So feel free to put the question in the chat if you think you have any at this point of time. All right, Professor, the floor is yours.
Do you see my slides?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, all right then. So thank you very much, Social Innovation Movement, for inviting me to this exciting webinar. And thank you, Dr. Ainurul, for the kind introduction. My name is Hasib, as was mentioned. So currently I am with the Innovative Industry and Sustainability Science Research Cluster. And my role there is to implement some research management, to manage some research grants that involves implementing and planning for impact. So today I'll be sharing my experience from that point of view. And Dr. Ainurul, do you want me to continue?
Oh, okay. Do you have any other things to add?
No, for me, I think that's all for me.
Right. Okay. All right. So yes, maybe Dr. Amani, you want to share about your background?
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Ainur, for inviting me to give sharing my session, more of conversing with all of you about experiences regarding how do you make an impact with your research. It's a big question. So basically, currently I'm a deputy director at RMC, as stated before. My role is basically to look into the portfolios of universities, starting from the inception stage of research and seeing the impact and pushing it towards commercialization. At the same time, just addressing, some of you might wonder, right, the engineering is all about making money, and commercialize is not just that, it's actually also making that social impact, right? So this is something that I will share regarding the experience and also some of the things that I do at the universities. Yep.
Fantastic. Adriana, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Adriana. Thank you, Sim, for the invitation. So I work as a lecturer in entrepreneurship, and in that role, most of my work is connecting my research with either incubators, accelerators, and other organizations supporting entrepreneurs in terms of developing programs, services, and toolkits to help their work reach its full potential. And then I also work directly with young entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, and commercial entrepreneurs in terms of developing skills, changing mindsets, changing ways of working and practices to again achieve their goals and their objectives. And in a previous life, as in a few years ago, I also was the director of engagement, impact, and innovation for the strategy and entrepreneurship group, where most of my role was building relationships between the institution and local organizations to support colleagues to take their research into a more impact-driven pathway. I look forward to having a conversation with you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for the kind introduction of yourself. Now, I'm not going to take any time further. My first question is, okay, so we know that impact is not an immediate outcome. And today we are talking about planning for research impact. It requires careful planning. It requires, a lot of thinking before we do the planning. I just want to know before we go into further on about the societal impact and so on, how can we put effort on planning this research impact? Or what did you do to plan for your research impact? So any of you, okay, Adriana, you want to go first? Yeah.
I saw in the chat that my voice is very soft, so try to speak louder. Let me know whether that's any better. I think the very first thing I need to say is that the impact starts with a research question. I think as researchers, we very often think about what's the theoretically interesting question here? What can we do that changes how we think about theory? But it also needs to answer the other question, which is how will this make a difference for anyone? Is this just about my curiosity and a theory that only 5 people who sit in ivory tower offices care about? Or alternatively, how do we think about our research questions, and how do we select research questions and apply funding for research questions and develop entire research programs that from day one have a potential to make an impact? So thinking about, if I answer this research question, so what? How does it help anyone? And that would be my very first starting point.
Thank you. What about Professor Asif? Do you have anything to add on that?
I will discuss that in some detail during my presentation. Is that okay?
So let's go to Dr. Amani first, and then we go for your presentation.
All right.
Okay, so in terms of planning for research impact, at least in my experience, I have both world experience. I've been 18 years in the United States, and also working in the R&D, and also writing grants and so forth when I was in the United States, and so for even being principal investigator to some projects such as funded by NASA, and also working projects funded by EPA and all these big, funders, right? So when I look into my experience, is that what I can see about research impact, especially talking in the context of not just engineering, but research in general, is actually looking into how does the research contributes to whether the advancements of fundamental knowledge, if you're working on fundamental research, in terms of societal impact, the work that you do, how does it impact the society in various forms? And I'm going to talk a bit more about that. But in the commercial side, especially engineering and science, right? If you look into the current Moderna vaccine by Professor Robert Langer, who's actually taking that research from R&D stage, right, to the commercial side, and also solving the issue of the pandemic, is also another level of impact from the research. So for me as a scientist and a trained engineer is that impact can happen in various ways. Whether it's an advancement in fundamental study, you're studying the black hole and so forth, there's an advancement in that study. If you look at the way Einstein with relativity, years later, then it becomes the theory and so forth is used in the GPS. And that's how you have the impact from the study of the fundamental research. But at the same time, when we come into a stage where when you do R&D, that the question always comes of how do we make that impact? So for me, in order to plan for that, it's not only being smart in the science, but also engagement with the end users or the stakeholders, or understanding the needs of society, the cultural context. So all of those, I think, for me, is that what really, in terms of planning for impact, really need to have that in mind. Second is that in terms of executing, in terms of the planning and execution of creating that impact. That's another stage. And I think that I agree with Adriana about the platforms that there are. I look into the website. There's a lot of platforms that you can use for planning impacts. And then there's toolkits that you can use to look impact. But at the same time, what helps me actually is doing conversation with stakeholders. I do that a lot. Especially I'm in the biomedical space, so you talk with doctors, medical practitioners, not just the clinicians, but also the policy makers and people who are involved in that space. So you can see it's not just the technology side, but also engagement with the other stakeholders. Okay. And the third is that one of the things that I found is that a lot of scientists, I'm talking about science, even social scientists and also the hard science, is that we often think, oh, no one is going to fund my research, The first thing we need to ask is that research question. Why would people, or the question, why is people not funding our research? Maybe because the impact, if not seen enough, for people to give the funding for you to execute that research. And that requires a lot of skills. I'm going to talk a bit about that also in terms of having your story be heard to the public. A lot of times scientists and researchers like to be in the labs and the office. Our story is not heard. So there's tools and ways to make your research to be heard so that you can have conversation with the stakeholders. So I think I'll stop at that because I have more to say in terms of experience and so forth. But I think that's my starting point of how to create an impact in your research.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Professor Abdul Hasib, you want to start your presentation then?
Yes, I think I can, yeah. Can I?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I think Dr. Amani already highlighted the main points. And in my presentation, probably I would go through the process that we undertake in order to help our researcher to plan for their journey on the road of impact. And we basically use the framework that is practiced in the UK, and particularly this research impact toolkit is a very good help to us. So the background of this new program that we started in 2018 is that, as you probably know, that in fact, surely all of you know the impact, how important impact is becoming. So we plan to build our capacity in planning and delivering impact among our researchers. So that was the main idea. In the meantime, we have been doing this interdisciplinary research because we thought that increases the chance of bringing impact. So we combine them together. So we create this impact-oriented interdisciplinary research in which a few groups, at least 3 research groups, from at least 2 disciplines would come together and then define their research project and formulate it. And we currently focus on the niche and thrust areas that has identified. And the first program that we started was in May 2018. So currently we are running the third cycle of this IIRG program. Typically, this is the flow line. And what I would like to stress the stages. So number 1, so this pre-proposal workshop, and then impact planning workshop of the shortlisted projects during this stage of planning of this research project. And we also have subsequently more workshops and sharing sessions, but I will concentrate on the essence of these 2 main workshops that we implement, that we conduct in order to help our researchers. And the main message that we have is this: in order to create impact, we need to work with stakeholders. We cannot do it alone. And we have to tell what we are doing to the right stakeholders, as Dr. Amani already mentioned. So this is as simple as that. But of course, implementation is not simple. And in the impact planning workshop, we let the researcher to come together as a group, and we also encourage them to bring their stakeholders, which they have initially identified already. And then we let them work in group to come up with these 4 things. One is to identify their research impact objective, and then to identify the stakeholders and then select them, map them. And then the next 2 activities are related to research communication. So they need to identify the audiences and how to communicate with them. And we spend quite a lot of time in understanding the research impact and objectives. Probably I will go through them quickly. So we use still this linear chain model, although there are some criticism to this, but we at the being the beginners, we find it quite useful and conceptually simple for the beginning researchers. And as we see here, the essence is that impact will go step by step. And although this is shown in a linear manner, but we also realize that it can be quite iterative. So it is not always so simple. But what we get here is that in order to create impact, we need to have output, and then stages, we have some outcome, and that can lead us towards our impact. And we have some specific examples just to let them understand, because I have to tell you that this is a learning process for us as research managers and also for the researchers. So we do it together, learning by doing. And the thing that we are doing in the University of Malaya, it's a mixture of all disciplines. So we have social science related research, we have science and technology related research. And the science and technology related research constitute a large part of our research activities, which means that many of the researchers would like to have some products or processes. Now, the toolkit that we have been using from this UKRI is probably mainly geared towards social sciences. So we feel that we need to have additional consideration of the technology readiness level. So we expose it to the researcher, ask them where they are now before they start the project. And then we ask them to identify where they want to go at TRL level, which one TRL, from TRL 2 to TRL 4 or TRL 1 to TRL 4, whatever it is. And then we also tell them that they cannot do it alone if they want to go to higher TRL, so they have to find partners. Now, talking about partners, so these stakeholders are so critical in our journey to this impact. And there are a lot of different definition and confusion about all these terms. So we try to clarify those to ourselves and to the researchers through some specific examples. And the message that we get is this, that as we move from output to outcome to impact, we do not have total control. We lose control progressively, and we have to talk with others, work with others, and see how we can get their help and we can align them towards our objective in order to get the outcome, the intended outcome in the long run. And stakeholders are key to this planning process. So we use this matrix, again borrowed from this impact toolkit, and we ask them to list down their toolkit, their stakeholders, do the prioritization, and then put them in the upper right quadrant, those stakeholders who are aligned with their approach and have a lot of interest. And then we ask them to prioritize them, because within the time frame and the resource constraint, they may not be able to work with all of them. So they have to prioritize and work. And at the same time, they have to keep an eye on the rest of the stakeholders and communicate with them as and when necessary. As for the research communication, so this is another key component. And in that particular workshop, they would again do the brainstorming, identify the audience, and then map out the communication activities that they would like to undertake. And we ask them to be as specific as possible. And of course, they cannot do it just in one workshop. They have to work subsequently. And we also know that this is a process, and this involves a lot of involvement. And many researchers find it as additional job. And it is additional job, but if they really want to have impact, they have to do this. So we try to make it easier for them. We give them some support, monetary support to carry out all those activities, engage with the research communities. And we highly encourage them to encourage your postgraduate students and postdocs to be involved in the process to help them in this whole mammoth task. I will stop, but before I do that, let me just show you one last slide, I guess, and which is in the traditional approach. When we identify our research question, we go to research papers, read them, go to conferences, talk with colleagues nationally, internationally, come up with a problem which is of great academic interest. However, in order to create impact, this probably is not the most efficient. So we tell the researcher, you should consider something like this. So before you even identify the research problem, look at the bigger picture in your area, the national need, the international scenario, etc. Talk with the stakeholders who are relevant in your area, and then try to identify an unmet need. And probably that unmet need will be complex. You may not be able to solve it. To talk with the stakeholders and also the interdisciplinary researchers in your university or elsewhere. And then, of course, as a researcher in a university, we have to give it a scholarly phase. So we have to do a lot of literature review on those unmet demands, and then come up with a research problem that will have two goals. One is academically to achieve the academic objectives, and then to have the societal benefit, at least potentially, in the long run. And we highly, highly encourage them to co-create the project together with the stakeholders. I think I would stop and let you go ahead.
Thank you, Professor. I think what you have done is providing and making my role easier, because you lay out all the foundation there nicely. Now, the part is actually for Dr. Alfie and Dr. Andriana to actually share with all of us on your experience in executing all of these things that Professor Abdul Hasib has laid out for us. Okay, we have so many things here that I have in my mind to ask. We talk about research, research funders, the importance of identifying research users and research audience there. Now, the first thing first here, it's really easy for us to identify stakeholders. So Professor Abdul Hasib has said, and you all have already have said, we need to identify our stakeholders up front. Okay, researchers have to identify stakeholders and beneficiaries, and then we need to prioritize that based on the stakeholder mapping that Abdul Hasib have mentioned. But how do we do that? Can you actually share with us, Adriana? How did you do it? And then we move on to Dr. Amani to explain to us what was the challenges that you go through when you are, doing this in real life. It's easy to say, oh, do this and do that, but in reality, it's really challenging.
So I guess from my perspective, what really matters is that the very, very first thing that happens, and maybe this is where I'm contradicting my own response to the first question, is building relationships with stakeholders. I very much object to this idea that stakeholders are to be mapped, to be communicated at, to be talked at, for us to tell them, here, here's the exciting thing I've done, and keep bombarding them with, this is my work, you should be using my work. And it should really be about building trust from the very beginning of our work, from our very first day as PhD students, or even before we think about the PhD. But how do we build these long-term, lasting, sustainable, trusting relationships? And I think particularly as researchers, we need to acknowledge that we have a terrible reputation. People think of us as these elitist, privileged, spoiled people who live in their teeny tiny bubbles and get to pursue their curiosity and their projects without necessarily thinking about, so what, how does it work for anyone else? And we really need to change that reputation. And the way to change that reputation is to develop strong relationships that from day one then fuel projects together, that projects are genuinely co-created instead of imposed on communities, organizations, and so forth. And I think it really starts with the way we train PhD students, because PhD students apply, they come to us and we tell them, okay, go to your office, your lab, whatever, do your thing, and then come back to me in 3 or 4 years when you have something that makes a theoretical contribution. So if that's their experience, we limit their opportunities to develop relationships with their communities. They spend 3, 4, 5 years alone. And then all of a sudden, we expect them to have the social skills to build relationships. We expect them to know which communities to go to, who are the people they need to be talking to. So for me, the reality is that we need to start much earlier when we think about impact and how we build the relationship. So we don't even have to map out stakeholders. Obviously, if there's anyone that might object to the research or the work, yes, absolutely, that should be something that's monitored. But this whole idea of persuading people and convincing them to come to our side of the world, I find quite problematic because it's a different way of colonizing. And obviously, I acknowledge that I live in the UK and that comes with a very specific social legacy, but it's another way for us to tell, hey, we're important and our work matters, so you should be using our work. So how do we shift that relationship? How do we actually start from relationships? And it's really, really difficult, and it means that we need to show up. And very often we need to show up and just be quiet and listen to what people have to say, show up and actually do pro bono work so they see that what we do can make a difference, even if that doesn't come with funding, even if that doesn't come with research publications. And obviously we work in institutions that don't really value that, or at least most of the institutions that I've been involved with don't really value that. So how do we also then influence our institutions to change their incentives?
Fantastic.
And I think that's where I'm going to leave it.
Yeah, thank you so much for those interesting points that you've mentioned there. I mean, it's quite provocative that, in the university, they ask us to, manage and plan our stakeholders and do our stakeholders mapping. But in reality, it's about us being there. It is about us showing up. So, Dr. Amani, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm going to basically echo what Dr. Adriana said. It's all for me. Is really about incentives. When you look at the universities, I think let's look back into this university, right? The role and function of university. Okay, when you look at the way we do things, for example, in terms of establishing relationships, right? Oftentimes, researchers, you get, I don't know about University Malaya or other universities, but you get into this mode of having MOAs. Start doing MOAs, and all of these are counted in your KPIs. This is not a measure of relationship. Okay, I'm going to say that. And that won't create the impact you want. If it's just about the numbers of MOAs, the number of MOUs, and fulfilling whatever incentives that was put, that for us as academics, okay, is to review back these KPIs or the incentives that was put for the university researchers and whether this is creating impact or not. The first is to ask the hard questions. Are we doing things that leads to that impact that we want to create? Okay. One of the things that I look, for example, I'm giving an example of my alma mater, Purdue University. When I was in the United States, one of the measures of impact they look at is whether the society feels connected to the university. Just the surrounding community. Do they feel connected to the university? Right? Do they feel belonged? That it is part of them, part of the culture of the place, and so forth. And this is what the measure of impact of Purdue University's institution, because they're living in this place in West Lafayette, in the middle of nowhere. It's basically corn and soy, right? That's what it is. So basically what it does to the community was that people feel engaged. Students from the high schools and the schools, the local schools around knows about the research that is done at Berk Nanotech Center at Purdue, right? So how do we look at change this incentive so that we're working towards impact? So this is something that when I stayed at my position and I look at the way we do things and having that mindset of years of training in the United States and coming back here, and I said, look, I think the universities in Malaysia needs to look back at the incentives, number one, because relationships, just like a relationship in real life, is not creating by say, hey, hi, and bye. No, right? Relationships are creating by substance, it needs to have quality. It needs to have the quality of time, not just, hey, I have this COVID kit. You better use my COVID kit because you know what? I'm going to get, this award and that award. I mean, we come with that position as academics. I have to say that. We tend to have that mindset. So take a step back as academics. So this is what I did, just for example, with the COVID kit that I did. Really, when our team come up with that, it's not about, we're thinking about anything else but just to see how can, with the body of knowledge that we have as researchers, okay, can contribute towards this, helping out the frontliners in this pandemic with that intention, right? And then we look at our expertise. What can we do, right? And humble ourselves, be on the ground and see all the pains that the frontliners has to go through, okay? In terms of what they do at daily basis, some of our team members are involved in the process at a daily basis. So we see the pain, all the things that we've gone through every day. And that is the motivation of the work. First day zero, engagement with the people who's dealing with the problem. Okay, so having that basically really, when we wake up every day in the morning, our attitude has changed because it is mission driven. It is not for getting that, recognition award in the university just to tick a KPI. No, it is about saving lives, right? It's a different level of engagement, okay? Contribution. So for me, really, I was telling to my fellow academics, right? If our research is just for ourselves, hitting that KPIs, we're not creating, forget about talking about impact. Okay, first, incentive has to change. Second, when I look into engagement, okay, in terms of public engagement, the universities need to see themselves as someone who needs to not just reach out to the public in terms of fulfilling the SDG goals. We like to talk about that really. Now it's like the SDG goals, right? SDG goals number what? Number 3, number 5, or whatever number you want to hit, right? It's not about that, okay? I need to say the hard things here, okay? It's about doing the things that basically what people think matters, the other people. It matters to them, right? So if you look in the context of Malaysia, when the pandemic hits, when the first MCO and so forth, right? When the first lockdown, how many people have lost jobs, right? These people lose jobs and so forth. Well, we are getting paid with a salary every month. Okay, so our work must go somewhere, must solve something, right? So with that mission, that's the way I look into this thing. The third is that in terms of context. So if you look into the context of, say, for example, when I came back to Malaysia, I was trying to see how my NASA sensors level first world country sensors can fit into the developing countries, right? The first thing I did was, just to give experience to all of you, is that I said I need to go to the hardest hit areas during the flood in 2015. I went to Kuala Krai, Kelantan. Okay, 2 weeks after the flood. See the way how people are living. Kampung Lepan Meranti, Kampung Lalo, not even Gua Musang. Okay, go to the ground and see, is this Malaysia 2015? Right? And then the NGOs at that point were saying, we need a sensor, Dr. Manipur. We need to see whether the water is drinkable or not. Therefore, I said, yes, that's what I want to do. NASA technology, sensors for detecting pathogens. And you know what? The feeling when you do that, it's not about KPIs. You see that Pakcik at the kampung can actually drink fresh water. That's the impact.
Wow,
Okay?
that's very powerful.
So I'm just saying, it's not about, we need to go beyond KPIs, really, as academics. Go beyond the KPIs, it's about doing the things that matters, really. So I think I'll stop at that, or else I'll go a little bit more, examples that I have, right? But I think, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I understand that, doing things that matter, and that is exactly what Professor Abdul Hasid wanted to encourage for all researchers in University Malaya, and what Andriana has been doing as well with you, Dr. Amani. But one thing, I just have to be realistic. Being an academic for past several years, and also engaging and trying to encourage as a chair in the research and impact at the Institute of Small Business Enterprise in the UK. It's not an easy thing to say. We have teaching to do, we have research to do, and now what you're trying to say that I have to go out and researchers have to go out, encourage them to engage with this community. And in fact, even in my role here, it's really difficult for me to even encourage my fellow academics, my fellow colleagues, to actually do this support for COVID, for example, because we ourselves are overwhelmed, right? So like you said that right, when we do to the community, we go to the hard core, go to the ground. But in reality, we are just human being, right? Human being. Now, any tips, from all of you in terms of how can researchers do that? Right? How can researchers? I've been trying to support my colleagues on this. I've been trying to support my researchers on this, and this is something that we need to be realistic, right? Impact. You said that we have to change the KPI incentive, right? The universities are giant, right? It's easy said that for us at the level where quite senior level as researchers. Yes, I've been doing that since my junior year, hence the reason why we can easily go up in our senior year. But in realistic, not everybody able to do that, full stop. What can we do about it? Adriana?
I don't think it's our job. I think it needs to be institutional change. And I hate to say this, but if we rely on individuals to keep hitting the wall because there's no support and there are no incentives for them, we'll see a lot of people just dropping out. We'll see a lot of people leaving academia because simply academia isn't structured properly for a way that allows for impact. And I think it comes back to two things. The first one is incentives, which we've been talking about. So if institutions genuinely care about impact, what are the incentives for individuals related to impact? So when you apply for a promotion, the only thing that the university wants to see is how much money have you brought in and how many papers do you have in 4-star journals. There are no incentives related to impact in most places. So it's about individual incentives, not necessarily about institutional incentives. And the other thing is around workload. How do we allocate time? So I'm on a 40-60 contract. 60% of my time goes for teaching and 40% of my time goes for research. And that 40% of time for research technically should allow for writing papers, revising papers, being a reviewer for journals, applying for funding, supporting PhD students. Oh, and by the way, impact somewhere in there, sprinkle it like dust. So if universities genuinely care about impact, they also need to allocate time for impact, because as we've been talking about, impact takes a long time, not just because of the process of moving from activities to outputs and outcomes. It's also about the time that it takes to build relationships. So if I go to my line manager and say, I've spent 200 hours this year building relationships, her response would probably be, but where are your papers?
Yes, Dr. Amani, you want to add on that? And then we move on to Professor Hasib. Yeah?
So, since I came back to Malaysia after I launched the satellite to space, right? So I was a project leader for SPORSAT, which is NASA nanosatellite project in 2014. When I lead the project, there's a few things that I've learned, and I think that some of these few things that I've learned is something that I basically try to apply in the context of Malaysia. So when I came back 2014, is that the first thing I see is that a lot of our researchers are being jack of all trades, master of none. They're doing too many things. They're spread too thin in terms of doing administrative jobs, with the teaching. Suddenly, a new rector came with the SDG goals and community services. It also involves, yes, I'm being very blunt and clear here, is that all of these are given to the researchers to be part of the, basically the things they need to deliver by the end of the year, okay? Including publications, of course, Adriana said, grants, funding, right? PhD students and mentorship and classes, and I can list all of those activities and we can all academics relate to it, right? Therefore, when I look into this, I said, look, this can't be it. I said, because one of the good practice I've learned when I was working with NASA project is that one is that, which I think can be applied in Malaysia, is that the role of these program managers and the role of when they bring you as a young scientist or researcher into an institution, is the first thing they ask you to basically design your research program. Okay, so what is that? So when I came, okay, I need to create a research program in a setting where there's no research program. Just to let Prof. Hasib know, we are not research university, it's Prof. Hasib. So of course, I come to a university just learning about research culture. Okay, not like University Malaya, but we are getting there. We're working towards that. So I said, okay, we need a research program. So the first thing I did was to chart that path. Basically, I come, they treat me, even though I launched a satellite, they still treat me as a junior researcher. Okay, I admit, I come back, fine, junior researcher, I'll start junior researcher, right? That's what's given to me. So the first grants, I said, if I were to survive, there needs to be some money, right? So we don't have research funding money that are used. We don't have anything, basically. We have to apply for grants. The first thing I did was, I need to apply for grants so that I can feed a PhD student, a master's, and develop my research program, right? So the first thing you did is to look into what I did was to look into the portfolio of funding in Malaysia. And I think a lot of young researchers, when they come, they don't do that. They think FRGS, a fundamental research is the only thing they're introduced to, which is under Ministry of Education, Higher Education. The first thing I did was to look, what are the private funding? Where are the government funding, the NGOs funding, everything in the ecosystem of Malaysia? The first 6 months, all I did was just travel the whole Malaysia to talk to people. Hey, I'm Amani, just came back from US. I don't know anything. Humble yourself, right? Do that conversation. And then I found out is that, wow, the funding in Malaysia is just not from Ministry of Higher Education. You can get funding from almost every person you talk to, agencies and so forth, if, they find what the problem that you can solve for them, okay? That you have the ability to do that. And a lot of time I found is that besides the ministries, from private people and private funding is that they are actually funding the person more. They're looking into the individual than actually the technology or the things I'm bringing in. So I was like, wow, they believe in Dr. Amani, so we're going to fund you. And of course, with the qualifications and so forth, that will help also, right? But my advice to the junior scientists is that to basically form a research program. What is a research program? Basically is that you want to create your impact immediate, intermediate, or long-term down the road. You need to have that plan, right? What can you do in the immediate right now? What can this immediate that you do solve to the long-term goal? Okay, so I have that. Now I'm at a stage where a lot of my work, which is funded by myself or from private agencies or even the ministry, is that we're forming into a commercial discussion, which was done at the beginning stage of the research. So beginning stage, I came, the first thing I did was to see the business people. Who are the business people? Well, my friends who work at Wall Street, my friends who just came back from the United States and just came back to Malaysia trying to find a business to work on. So I talked to them, do you think that my water for the pathogen sensor is great for, it has a commercial viability? The answer was like, you know what, can the sensor be modified for glucose or biomedical? Because water is really a lot of regulation. So when you have that conversation with people, then you start to structure, oh, the core technology is this, but then it can be applied to various stakeholders and so forth. So this is when you chart your research program. I like that in the United States because the first interview they gave to you was, can you show us your research program? What is your plan in the 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, 20 years down the road? What is that plan? I think that conversation has to be for the young researchers when they first enter an institution. So I think that was one of my suggestions in terms of creating an impact.
Fantastic. And I think I still remember my first job when I applied here in the UK. That was exactly what I have to do. I haven't even finished my PhD and I had to show my research plan. And that was actually, it's quite challenging to position, and coordinate your research, even though you haven't actually finished your PhD and when you're applying for a job in the UK as well. I think it's quite good to know that in the US it's actually in a similar manner. And I hope, I think Professor Abdulhasi, it puts you then in a position quite challenging here because the questions I'm going to ask you is actually the questions that I read quite a lot in the chat function there. Now, can we change the KPI then? Because you are in this position to influence, you are in the most prestigious university in Malaysia, and then you are holding this, this role there in Malaysia, in Malaya. Can we change that incentive? I know that you mentioned as well about the funds that you put together to encourage, so that's some of the questions asking about whether we need to incorporate funds, support. But my question to you is it feasible for us to change the KPI? Because I got my research impact hours in my university. I mean, I got lucky, yeah. They gave me in terms of that kind of support. But in Malaysia, I think we need it. Can it be done?
Dr. Ainurul, you are asking me the most difficult question of the day. All right. So the KPI culture, to some extent, helped us to achieve our research productivity in terms of papers, in terms of citation. That is well and good. But now that we have to live with impact in the future, we cannot escape this. And this has to be there in our mindset. And there has to be a change. Not a paradigm shift, I would say, but a major change has to be there. And this change has to come from the national level to the university management level, up to the floor at the researcher level. Now, we at the University of Malaya, we realize that we have to do that. But this KPI framework that we are so used to for so many years, and probably we cannot scrap it all on a sudden. But what we are trying to do now is to create new sort of incentive in our system. And that is money is one of the main incentives. So we try to orient our research towards more impact orientation by giving the research grants which are targeted towards impact. And that is, in a way, at the beginning will help us, because we also need to see that this impact thing doesn't happen automatically. It needs a lot of experience. a lot of education on our part as the research manager, also on the researcher's part. And we, at this moment, are trying to emphasize on those activities. So how we incentivize them in spite of the system. We cannot break the system now. Of course, we talk with our top management so that they have to make it a point that this impact has to be there in their KPI basket, whatever they do it, however they do it, so it has to be there. Now at our level, so as I mentioned that orienting all our most of our research program towards impact is helping us, and we get a lot of good response from our researcher. They're willing to do, and we never blame our researcher. Do not blame the researchers. Most of them are willing to do because they are also convinced that impact is something that we cannot just avoid at this moment in the future. So we, in addition to giving incentive, we try to help them as much as possible through all those sharing sessions, through all those workshops, through all those discussions, and by creating this kind of learning environment in the university. And we feel that this is helping us to bring our researchers to a level where they are embracing impact. Particularly, we see a good sign among the young researcher. So some of them are quite enthusiastic, very, very forthcoming, and they themselves, in spite of being young and inexperienced, go out, find their stakeholders, bring it to them, to us, and then talk in a group together with their stakeholders. So we see this kind of changes happening. But I agree with Dr. Amani that yes, this KPI thing, we have to think seriously about this at a higher level and create this component of impact and incorporate into this KPI mix. With that, probably I let others to continue.
Thank you on that. And I think one thing that, based on my experience on how I got creative before, because I started from a teaching university when I started in the UK, and I moved out into a research university. And one thing that I actually did was that I have to be creative in terms of defining the hours that have been given to me. So we actually have this scholarship and outreach hours where, you know, you go out there and encourage school children to actually go into university, right? And I think I just wonder, I think I agree with so many participants that put in the questions there. And at the end of the day, it is about individuals. It's about the researchers, whether they want to do it or not. Regardless of whether there's support or not, we need to be creative as a researcher. We need to be entrepreneurial. And I'm going to hand in here to Andriana here, you know, in terms of finding loophole, you know, finding the resources, right? So I negotiated for my outreach hours to do my impact. You know, technically, I'm actually going out, rather than going out to the school children, I go out to the local community in Wolverhampton before. It was so long ago. And I started to be with them and then try to understand what their needs. Because I do business support during COVID time, it's very, very challenging. Regardless of that, you know, we as a researchers, we just have to be creative, right? And this, Andrea, can you give some tips in terms of, because you're doing entrepreneurship, you're teaching entrepreneurship, and you're supporting social entrepreneurs to actually run their business while mindfully thinking about their well-being. Now, is there anything that you could actually share with us? Some tips for our researchers. They are doing social goods here. They are doing, you know, balancing the economic benefit that they have to do for their KPI, while at the same time on the community. You know, that's how I see it. Any tips that you could actually share with our fellow academics here?
So I think this idea of being creative with resources is quite interesting, and probably in a very specific way reflects what I did. So I work with social entrepreneurs, and one of the ways that I was building relationships with them at the very beginning of my time at Sheffield was inviting them to come to my classes and speak to my students. And that might seem like a very, very simple step, but then you build in coffee before the session or coffee after the session. You email them a few months later and say, hey, I saw this article. I know that you don't have access to it, but it looks really interesting and it might be helpful. All of those gestures that are embedded within activities that you're already doing are quite useful, and they're a creative way to build relationships with your community. The other thing that I need to say is that universities are massive and there's so many hidden resources, and sometimes it's a matter of knocking on a door and saying, hey, I need this, can I have it? Some people will say no, other people will say, actually, we have this thing, it's not exactly what you're asking for, but it might do you want to use it? And the problem is that universities are incredibly siloed. So just at my university, there are 5 faculties, there are 10,000 people. So how do you find the people to go to? But it's one mechanism where you can tap into resources that are not necessarily in your department, but within the university that you can use, whether that's about space, whether it's about software, whether it's about relationships. So for example, there are a lot of social entrepreneurs who work with our engineering department, and that has been a way for me to build relationships with them. And the final advice that I probably have is to work with other academics. I think, again, the system, at least in the UK, doesn't necessarily incentivize people to work with others from the same institution, because if you're creating publications, only one of you can get the credit in RF terms. But who are the like-minded people that you have complementary skills with, that you can split the work or you can work well together? So find those people and then just essentially keep them hostage. Never let them leave your life. Because I do think that when you work with people you can trust, with people who have complementary skills, the load is just lighter. So when we talk about well-being, it means that you don't have to do all the work. There are people that you can share the work with and still creating impact and still moving both of your careers forward. Because yes, we should be driven by our intrinsic motivation, but also we work in a system that says you need to apply for promotion in 3 or 5 years. How do you do that? So I think that's where I'm going to leave it, around being creative with resources, asking for resources in various places across the university, and working in partnership with others who have complementary skills and you can trust. I think trust is incredibly important. You don't want to work with flaky people.
But that's the experimentation there. I mean, I've worked with so many people. I think, Andriana, you are on a good path there. I know that you're going to be successful with what you are currently doing, because that's exactly what I did before. It's all about collaboration. You will never be able to do everything yourself, and that's a fact, you know. But trusting people, learning to let go, and also be creative and knocking on the door. Okay, I mean, oh my God, I mean, we have only a few more minutes to wrap this up. I mean, I would love to discuss this further, but I really hope that SIM, Social Innovation Movement, can also invite all of you again to discuss, you know, a slightly different topic in relation to research impact. But before I go to all of the panelists to ask the final questions, then that incorporate some of the comments and questions that we have from the chat, I would like to thank Social Innovation Movement for hosting this webinar, because I believe that, you know, they are a non-profit organization that aiming to advance social innovation through research impact in Malaysia, and they and focus more on the movement, you know, in the individual movement, because I think at the end of the day it's about the collaborative effort. You know, if you need help in terms of not sure of where to go and understanding your research impact, or you don't know who to reach, you know, reach out to your research officers, reach out to SIM, Social Innovation Movement. I believe that they're more than happy to help you and share their knowledge and provide insight on and connect you with the community that needs help. I know Hasbi and Jian is actually working with local communities, and their role is actually to support Malaysian researchers community to connect with your local community and collaborative transformation. After that, they've done fantastic. So right, last question, which I'm dredging to ask, you know, but I have to, because we can't actually spend a whole day today here talking about impact, right? 3 tips or tools for all researchers here. And no, you cannot repeat what others have said. So you cannot say, I agree with that. Yeah, that will be the challenge. 3 tips. So hopefully by the end of the day, I'm going to give as well. And at the end of the day, everybody will have 3 times 4, you know, 12 tips that they can actually implement on planning and executing research impact. But somehow I have to go to Prof. Hasib first because he hasn't been talking quite for a long time. So we go to Prof. Hasib, and then Andrea, and then Dr. Amani, and then myself. I will then share the 3 tips. Yeah, 3 tips or tools for fellow researchers or also research officers who is planning and executing research impact. Prof. Hasib?
Number 1, we have to be open. And with this open mind, we have to go out there. But just sitting in the office will not bring impact. So that mindset has to be changed. And number 3 is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Without this, we cannot reach impact.
Fantastic. Thank you. Open, go out there, and collaboration. Anjana?
Okay, so I have put relationships first. If relationships work, everything else in the long term will fall into place. Start with the research question, particularly if you're a researcher, but also if you're a support officer, how do you encourage people to come up with questions that make a difference? And then play to your strengths. You don't have to do everything. Figure out what you're excellent at and just hone on that.
Oh, I like the last one there. That's fantastic there. Thank you. Dr. Amani?
Okay, so my first advice was, number 1 is create your small success factories. Basically, bring your team together at the early stage. Okay, bring business people, all the educators, the social scientists, everything under one roof. I call this the skunk works model. You can read about it. It's a Lockheed Martin model. Small, agile teams move mountains. Okay, sometimes you don't need 100, 1,000 people, 2 or 3, 4 people. Okay, like mindset can create that change. Number 1. Number 2 is be courageous, be brave. Sometimes to change things require us to be courageous, to speak up, right? To negotiate, to talk to people, and that requires you to get out from your comfort zone. That's number 2. Number 3 is actually to basically to take out that ivory tower hat, right? And humble ourselves and go down to the ground and see the communities and talk to people at the stage where they are at and see from the lenses outside from the ivory tower. And sometimes doing that enough actually can bring us the good research questions that we would need to solve. So I think that's 3 of my advice to every one of you. Thank you.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic there. So now we have 9 there. So we have going open, collaboration, relationship, research question from the start, play to your strength, small and agile team, be brave. Sorry, what was the last one, Dr. Amani?
The last one is to go to the ground, connect to people.
Connect with people. Sorry, I missed that. So just to make sure that I won't repeat myself. Now I'm putting myself in a difficult situation. I should have gone first. Oh my gosh. Right. I think based on my experience, what I can say is always stop thinking about me. It's about we. Is that we are thinking about. And I think I'm just talking here as well because I'm running a webinar next week. About the practice of we. If you are interested to join, feel free to join, and then I will try to get. It's a paid workshop, but in the UK. But if you email me, I'll try my best to pull some strings together to make sure that you can actually be there. For those who actually attended this session, it's a practice of we. I think that's something is very, very important that you need to do. The second one from myself is don't afraid to ask for help. And I think I won't be able to be here where I am without other people's help. And I think you have to, I quote with Adriana, I say, you are not alone in this world. You are in this together. If you feel that, oh my God, I'm so stressed, so many things that you need to do as a researcher, as an academic, all other academics, believe me or not, are in the similar situation as well. Seek help, ask for help. And that's one thing that we as a researcher sometimes feel that we need to to be the know-how. We need to know everything. No, we do not. We just a human being, seek help, because you'll be surprised of so many people that are willing to help you, either through funding, resources, and mentoring. The last one is actually mentoring. Find a good mentor. And I think across the years, I've been mentoring quite a lot of individuals that wanted to follow the path that I'm actually in at the moment, because I think about impact first before my publication. And I think that's a challenge by itself, because now I have so many impact, but I couldn't actually corroborate it with my papers because the papers hasn't been published yet. So it pushed me to publish, because otherwise my impact cannot be used for the RAF case study. So these are the things. Find a good mentor. We have these three people here in this webinar that that I'm more than happy. I believe more than happy to mentor you. Reach out to them. Sorry, I'm speaking from all of you. And connect with each other. Connect with a team so that you can actually meet like-minded people on impact and connect with each other. And I hope to see you in our webinar next time. And apologies that we're taking an extra minutes on our conversation today. And with that, I just want to say thank you to all of to our speakers today. Thank you so much, Adriana, for being with us at 7 o'clock in the morning. Thank you, Professor Abdul Hasib. I know you must be very busy with your role. Dr. Amani, I know you're very, very busy lady as well. It's really difficult to get you, it's really difficult to get you. But I'm so happy that you finally decided that you can actually join with us. I'm really honored to be here and sharing this session. And with that, I hope that our path will cross again. Yeah. Have a productive week, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, Seem.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you, everybody.